Hey guys, so I just came across this post about Jimmy Carter's funeral, and I've got to dive into it because there was a really interesting moment that people are talking about. As the world said its final goodbye to the 39th president today, some of the most prominent political figures of our time were gathered to pay their respects. And of course, when you bring together such a high-profile crowd, you're bound to get some awkward interactions. Now, one moment in particular has been making the rounds on the internet, and I think it's something a lot of us can actually relate to. Kamala Harris, the vice president, found herself in a bit of an uncomfortable situation. And let's just say it's a classic case of trying to avoid tension and making things a little more awkward in the process. So here's what happened. Kamala and her husband, Doug Emhoff, were apparently doing their best to dodge any uncomfortable run-ins with the Trumps. Now, we all know there's a lot of political tension between the Democrats and the Trumps, especially after the 2020 election, so it makes sense they'd want to avoid any direct interaction. So what did they do? They switched seats. They moved to the row ahead, hoping to get a little distance, right? But here's the kicker. That move ended up putting them right next to the Bidens. Can you imagine? You're trying to avoid one awkward situation and land right into another. But it didn't stop there. According to body language expert Judy James, Harris made an easy mistake that ended up adding to the tension. Now, this wasn't some huge blunder, but it was one of those little things you might not notice at first, but once you do, it becomes painfully obvious. So here's the deal. Trump, sitting just one row behind Harris, totally mirrored her approach. He didn't acknowledge her, didn't look her way. He completely ignored her. And while that moment was just a blip, it added to the overall awkward energy in the room. Honestly, when you're in a situation like that, where you're surrounded by so many people with so much history between them, it's hard to just act like everything's normal. And then here's another moment that viewers picked up on. Kamala Harris shared a pretty frosty non-greeting with Dr. Jill Biden. They were seated right next to each other, and people noticed they didn't exchange much of a word or even a glance. It wasn't overtly hostile, but it was definitely cold. Just that uncomfortable vibe where you know something's not quite right. It's fascinating, right? Here we are, watching some of the most powerful people in the world trying to navigate a funeral, and instead of focusing on the loss of a president, the attention somehow shifts to these small, human moments. It's a reminder that even the most prominent political figures can get caught in awkward, relatable situations like the rest of us. Anyway, I just wanted to share my thoughts. It's moments like this that make you wonder how you'd handle things in their shoes. Do you think Kamala Harris could have done something different? Or do you think it was just the nature of the event that made everything so tense? Let me know what you think.